In this video, I'm going to be discussing the Lydian mode. I suppose this is one of the weirder of the major scale modes, or maybe weird isn't quite the right term. It's certainly amongst the lesser used of the major scale modes. You don't hear it much in rock and pop music, for example. But having said that, it is a very cool and interesting sound, and I think that if you do want to be a well-rounded and knowledgeable guitar player, it's certainly something that's worth knowing about and worth exploring. So that's what we're going to be doing in this video, and the format of this video is going to be the same as my other modes videos. There's going to be a little bit of music theory where I explain how I understand the Lydian mode. Then there's going to be some practical stuff. I'll show you some ways that you can play it on the guitar and talk about when you can use it. So Lydian mode, harmony and chord progression. So let's get started. I'm just going to begin by playing a little bit of a Lydian mode improvisation just so you can get a feel for its sound. So my advice when you start exploring any of the major scale modes is to start by soaking up the feeling and the sound of each of these modes before you start worrying about the theory and all of that stuff. These modes are first and foremost something that is an expressive tool that generates a particular kind of feeling and emotion. Now with the Dorian mode and the Mixolydian mode, that was quite an easy thing to do. There are plenty of well-known song examples which use the Dorian and Mixolydian modes almost exclusively. But when it comes to the Lydian mode, I was a bit harder pressed to come up with some good examples, and that's because it's not really very widely used in pop and rock music. Yes, it is used to some extent in film music, soundtracks. Classical composers sometimes use the Lydian mode, but to find some solid examples of the Lydian mode in rock and pop music is a little bit challenging. But there were a few. I did a bit of rooting around on the internet, and I think the favourite examples of the Lydian mode amongst the examples that I found online were these. So the classic REM song Man on the Moon on the Automatic for the People album, that's often cited as an example of the Lydian mode sound, and I agree. In the verses of that song you've definitely got a Lydian kind of a flavour, and a similar song in many ways is the Tom Petty track Here Comes My Girl, and again in the verses it's got a Lydian mode kind of feeling, and then in the choruses it actually switches to the relative major. So I'm going to discuss that in a bit more detail later on in this video when I'm talking about Lydian chord progressions. Another cool example would be Waltz Number 1 by Elliott Smith, which is a fantastic song, one of my favourite songwriters. And he's obviously someone who's got quite a sophisticated ear and compositional sense. And in this song you've got a Lydian mode kind of feeling. It's not exclusively a Lydian mode song, I don't think, but that's something you find with a lot of modal compositions. You don't stick to one mode throughout an entire track. You can kind of mix between these different modes. So it might be Lydian mode and then it will switch to the major scale or the minor scale, for example. So those are really my examples. As I say, they are quite thin on the ground when it comes to songs using the Lydian mode. You have, of course, got guitar players who've written songs as vehicles for the Lydian mode. So, you know, people like Joe Satriani, Steve Vai, big fans of the Lydian mode sound. It's not sort of particularly music that I listen to, though I've got every respect for both of those players. And I think with Joe Satriani, I think there's the tune Flying in a Blue Dream, which has got that Lydian mode kind of feeling. So if that's your kind of music, then that might be a song that's worth checking out as well. And as I mentioned, you do find examples of the Lydian mode outside of popular music, so in film music, in classical music as well. I suppose the question arises, is it worth studying the Lydian mode and learning about the Lydian mode if you're not ever going to use it? That's going to be up to you. As I say, if you want to be a kind of knowledgeable guitar player, it's worth just knowing roughly what the Lydian mode is about and exploring its sound. But if you're just a kind of rock or pop guitar player, it's probably not worth placing too much emphasis on learning the Lydian mode. There are probably much more important things that you could be spending your practice time on. Let's discuss a bit of Lydian theory then, and I hope this isn't going to be too painful, but I think you do just need to understand the basics of modal theory before you can actually start making music with this stuff. And my approach here is exactly the same as with the other modes. If you've seen the Dorian and the Mixolydian videos, you'll know I like to think of modes first and foremost as just another type of scale. So just as you've got a major scale or a minor scale, so you've got a Lydian scale. So let's see how this works on the guitar. I'm going to do this from an F root note. I'm going to be talking about F Lydian throughout this video. So we've got an F note here at the 8th fret on the 5th string, and why don't we begin with just a straightforward F major scale. We could play that like this. And that's because the major scale is the starting point for all things theory, and also because the Lydian mode is very closely related to the major scale. In fact, it's just one note different. So if we've got the F major scale here, F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, and F, that's just a simple one octave F major scale. The F Lydian mode would be this. So you can see, you can hear that it's just one note different, and the difference is the 4th degree of the scale, the 4th note. So in the F major scale, we've got this note here, which is a B flat. In the F Lydian mode, we've got a B natural. So only one note different from a major scale, but that one change actually makes quite a dramatic difference to the sound and to the feeling of this scale. So I like to think of this stuff in terms of intervals. So the major scale is our starting point. If we number the notes or the intervals in the scale, we've just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then we're back to 1 again, and it's the 4th degree that we're going to alter to create the Lydian mode. So instead of a natural 4th, we've got a sharp 4. So just moving that note up by 1 fret, we've now got 1 root, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, and back to the root again. And it follows that it's that sharp 4 which is the character note of the Lydian mode. It's that note which distinguishes it from just a straight major scale. So it's that note to listen out for. It's a very distinctive, sound, and that's really the note that screams Lydian mode when you hear it in a musical context. So that, I think, is the most straightforward, the simplest way of understanding the Lydian mode. It's just a major scale with a sharp 4 and understanding it in terms of that scale formula. But of course, with modes, you've got an alternative way of looking at things, and that is seeing how the mode relates to the parent major scale. So the Lydian mode is the 4th mode of the major scale, which just means if you take any major scale, you start on the 4th note, but importantly, you make that 4th note the home note, the tonal center, then you're playing that scale in the Lydian mode. So if we take a C major scale and we find the 4th note, C, D, E, F, if we make that F note the starting note, the home note, but we continue to play the notes from the C major scale from that starting point. So that's exactly the same notes that we played before. It's just another way of generating those same notes. You can either just start from the root note and use the scale formula, the Lydian formula, or you can think in terms of the parent major scale. So if you're thinking in those terms, you want to play any Lydian mode, then you could play a major scale up a 5th or down a fourth. Personally, I've always found that slightly awkward. It's a bit of a slow process. If you actually want to use the Lydian mode in the heat of a real musical situation, it's better just to think about your root note and then play the Lydian scale straight away from that root note. But as I say, the Lydian is not amongst the most widely used modes, so maybe you don't want to spend a lot of time drilling all of your Lydian scale shapes and learning them as their own thing, in which case on those rare occasions when you need to play the Lydian mode, you might well like to think in terms of the relative major scale, and if you just play a major scale up a fifth, you're going to be playing the Lydian mode, and that could kind of get you out of a sticky situation where you need to play Lydian but you've not really studied it in any real depth. Let's look at a couple of practical ways of playing the Lydian mode on the guitar fretboard then, and perhaps we could start up here from this F root note, 13th fret on the low E string, and the Lydian mode from that starting point would look like this. So starting and finishing on that F root note. If you wanted to, you could relate it to a chord shape, so perhaps an F major chord, an F major 7th chord. Going to talk a little bit more about Lydian harmony in just a moment, but that's something I always recommend, is to relate your scale shapes to underlying chord shapes, and also to understand these scales beyond just having a finger pattern. So it's important to know the names of the notes, and perhaps even more important to know the intervals. So we've got the root, second, third, that all important sharp 4, 5, 6, 7, and then that repeats in the next octave. So when you're playing these notes, know what interval you're playing, and have that sound in your ears as well. So be able to sing the Lydian mode is a good little ear training exercise, I think, with modes, is to make sure that you can sing all of these notes and you recognise that sharp 4 when you hear it in a musical situation. We could also play the scale starting here with a 5th string root starting point. So starting and finishing from that F root note. So I'm starting, going to the highest note in the pattern, going down below the root note to the lowest note available, and then coming back and finishing on that F note. You can relate that to an F chord here, or an F major 7th chord perhaps. And the reason I want you to start and finish on that root note is if you don't do that, you're liable to start hearing that as C major. It is the same notes as C major, but we don't want to hear it as C major, we want to hear it as F Lydian. It's just because our ears have that kind of major scale bias. You play that series of notes, and in all likelihood you're going to start hearing that as a major scale, unless you really ground it around that F root note. And there are, of course, other Lydian scale shapes that you can explore should you wish. You can kind of go all out and exhaustive and look at all 5 of the caged shapes if you want to. You've got 3 note per string shapes. So for the average player, maybe you don't want to do that, but if you are really into this sound and it's something you use a lot, then absolutely go for it and just learn this Lydian mode as you would any other scale. The next thing you're going to want to do is make some music with these scale patterns. And the first thing I suggest you do is just do some noodling around. Try and find some simple ideas and melodies. And again, it's important to have that F note as your context here. So I like to play along either to a drone or to a loop. So I've got a drone pedal down here. I'm just going to record an F drone and then just noodle about a little bit with the Mixolydian scale. And you could do a similar thing playing along to a 1 chord loop. And as I said, the Lydian mode works over a major chord or a major 7th chord, so just a straightforward F chord, F major 7, perhaps adding in that sharp 4 or sharp 11. So if you play your F major 7 like this, you can just lift up the second finger and allow the open second string to ring, and that gives you a really nice sounding F major 7 with a sharp 11, which perfectly encapsulates that Lydian kind of a sound. Let's talk a little bit about Lydian chords, Lydian harmony. When can you actually use this sound? This is such an important thing when it comes to mode. You can't just play the Lydian mode whenever you feel like it. You've got to have the right kind of harmonic situation. And as we've already seen, the Lydian mode is a major type of mode. It comes from the family of major modes, and at its most basic, you can use it over a static major chord. So if we're thinking F Lydian, you can play that over an F major chord. The reason for that is you've got the notes from the F major chord within the scale. If you harmonise the scale, if you start from F, take every other note, you stack the thirds, you've got F, A, C, that's F major. So that chord is found within the scale, therefore over the F major, you play the F Lydian mode. If you wanted to extend that chord further, we've got F, A, C, and an E, that's an F major 7, so you can make it work over that chord as well. And you can play chords which have got a specifically Lydian flavour, so for that you really want that sharp 4 or sharp 11 to be in there. So you could play, I mentioned this earlier, but you could play a major 7 with a sharp 11. So one way of playing that would be like this. That's an F major 7 sharp 11. And earlier on I played it down here. The same chord. And another very Lydian sounding chord is this one. So this is actually a slash chord. It's a triad over a bass note. If you play a G triad over an F bass note, it gives you that Lydian sound. You've got the root, the 6th or the 13th, the 9th, and once again we've got that sharp 11 on top. So the triad over the bass note, that's a really nice sound. So G over F. As far as Lydian chord progressions or chord patterns go, in most of the pop and rock examples I've found, it's usually just a 2-chord Lydian pattern, and the easiest way to set up that sound is just to go between 2 major chords a whole step apart. So if we start with F and then play a G, that is going to describe that Lydian sound. So we've got our home major chord, our 1 chord, then if we play a 2 major chord, that actually contains our sharp 4. It contains that B note. So that B in relation to our tonal centre gives you that sharp 4. So you can really just go between those 2 chords. And that will be a very simple Lydian chord progression. It's not even a chord progression, just a 2-chord pattern or vamp. So just an F, and if you wanted to really emphasize that Lydianness even more, you might want to hold an F droning note. So you could play F and then go to G, but keep that F note in the bass, and that really establishes that Lydian sound very strongly. And the Lydian songs that I mentioned earlier are based on this 2 major chord kind of a pattern. So Man on the Moon, REM. Which is going between C and D essentially, but we're kind of shifting up that C chord shape, so you've got some open strings in there as well, but it's our home chord of C, and we shift up to the D, and you've got that sharp 4 in there, so that it's got that Lydian sound, and then that's only in the verse of the song. Then after that it does resolve to the relative major. So that's kind of the debate when you've got these kind of pop songs. Is that really Lydian, or is it just kind of the 4 and the 5 chord, but we're delaying the resolution to the 1 chord, which is major? Personally, this does sound like Lydian. We've kind of holding on these chords long enough to establish that kind of a Lydian mood, I think. And you've got almost exactly the same thing in the Tom Petty song Here Comes My Girl, which I think is remember it exactly, but it's based on an A going to a B, but here we've got that drone happening. So if you play an A chord and move the triad shape up to a B, but keep that A drone, then it's that classic kind of Lydian sound. So 1 major chord, and there's our sharp 4. Great guitar part, actually. I might have to learn that one properly. It might be a good lesson to look at in the future. I do like Mike Campbell's guitar style. But the same thing happens with that song. I think for the chorus it then goes to E, so it's kind of that prolonged kind of 4 to 5 movement before you go to the relative major, which is E. But again, it does stick on those 2 chords long enough to give you a distinctly Lydian kind of a flavour. And then you've got things like Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, which is again just a pair of major chords a whole step apart. I think there is a little bit of controversy over that song, whether it is truly Lydian or not, so I'm not going to get into that controversy in this particular video. You can make up your own mind about that, but I think there is that kind of ambiguity about a lot of these Lydian songs, whether it's really Lydian or whether this is just a 4 and 5 chord going to the relative major or perhaps to the relative minor. And if you wanted to explore Lydian harmony a bit more deeply, you could harmonise the scale and look at some of the other chords, triads that you can find, that you can generate from those notes. So you could just take the chords that belong to the relative major scale, and the same chords are going to belong to the Lydian mode. So the chords that belong to C major, the triads, the 7th chords, the extended chords, the sus chords, all of that stuff will work potentially in a Lydian mode situation as well. But I think for a true Lydian mode chord progression, you really need to establish that home chord, and you also need to have that sharp 4 in there. It sometimes can be a little bit difficult to do with Lydian just because it's quite a tense sound and your ear is always taking you back to the relative major or relative minor. But it's quite a fun thing to try. Maybe if you do really fall in love with this sound, it might be something you can explore. So those are some Lydian mode basics. I hope that for the average kind of a player that's probably going to be enough knowledge about the Lydian mode. But if you do feel the urge to take things a bit more deeply, you might like to explore some of that more advanced Lydian harmony. When you're improvising, you can use all of those materials as well. So any of the triads, 7th chord arpeggios, extended arpeggios that you can generate from that scale, you can use those as a basis for improvisation as well. So you more advanced players might like to give that a try. So those are some of the basics of the Lydian mode, and as I've said, it's not that widely used in pop and rock music, but if you do like the sound, then it might be something you want to explore further, and you can probably find some uses for this mode that I've not discussed. Maybe you can try writing some pieces, some compositions that use that Lydian mode sound. Now, if you would like a tab for the examples in this video, that's going to be up on the Patreon page. My backing track is going to be up there too, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.